Political parties carry out this crucial function of expressing ideas and running governments. And different civilizations and systems, youth get involved in political decision-making through joining parties. How do young members evaluate their positions in the parties? How do they communicate effectively with their predecessors to bring a more positive change to society and global governance? Hello and welcome to the discussion. I'm Xujin Duo. Today, we are honored to invite 7 distinguished guest speakers from different political backgrounds to explore these issues. They are Helga Zeb-LaRouche, founder and president, the Schiller Institute, and Adam Said, Central Committee member, Lebanese Communist Party, assistant professor and researcher of China Arab BRI Research Center, Zhejiang Gongshang University, and Xia Lu, associate professor at the School of Marxism Studies, research fellow at National Academy for Development and Strategy, Renmin University of China. And Yin Gudran, senior editor at China Daily, and he's from the International Department of the Communist Party USA. And also we have Joseph Olivier Mendo, head of the delegation of African youth in China, and Xie Zhongyu, secretary of the 4th party branch of the student art troupe, Tsinghua University, and Goplan Detokwa, PhD candidate at the Communication University of China. Welcome to the discussion. Okay, Helga, I will start with you. We live in a time of, I would say, uncertainty, if not a crisis. So if you look at this global situation through the lens of uncertainty or crisis, what suggestion do you have for young people or for the young people in any political parties to, play a role probably for the better of the world?
Well, it seems to me that the most important question to be clear about is the image of man, because the image of man determines everything you do. And there are right now 2 quite opposing views. One is coming from the neo-Malthusian oligarchical world outlook, which thinks that each human being is a parasite, a burden to nature, and is reduced to the CO2 footprint. And therefore, the less people, the better, because the less burden on nature. Totally opposite to that is the idea that every human being is unviable, sacred, the life is sacred, because the human species is different from all other species because we have creative reason, and that creative reason enables us to discover new physical principles. And if these principles, which are called scientific and technological progress, are applied in the production process, it leads to an increase in productivity, better well-being of the people, increase of the living standard and longevity. And this is fantastic because that proves that an immaterial idea, something which the creative mind generates newly, has an effect in the physical universe. So I think the second image of man, which has an incredibly optimistic idea that each human being is limitless, perfectible, and there is no limits to the perfectibility of the human species, is a much superior conception to the neo-Malthusian view. So given the fact that you have right now a lot of the first, in the whole, climate scare and so forth, I think to settle on the image of man would be my starting point to have any such discussion.
Well, that would be interesting, interesting discussion to explore, right, image of a human being. Suppose, the human being, we are rational, perfectly rational, and there's a chance to create a global political party, and the young people will be part of that. What outstanding features you want to have for this party? Helga?
Oh, I think this is such a fantastic idea. I think this should be done. I think this is an idea whose time has come. And I would start really with the idea of the shared community of the joint future of mankind, because that's what we have, if people like it or not. But we are one human species and our destiny will be one, either good or bad. And this is the same idea also, of Friedrich Schiller, the German poet who said there is no difference between the patriot and the world citizen. And it happens to be that this is also a beautiful idea which Tsai Yuan Pei, and I hope I pronounce this correctly, he was the first rector of the Beijing University at the beginning of the 20th century. He was very famous for having introduced a lot about the aesthetical education of men. And he had this fantastic idea that you have to create a great community of the world. And he used this word, and again, my pronunciation is probably wrong, Da Tong Shi Chia. Da Tong Chi Chia.
大同世界. Yeah,
Okay,
that's good.
which is the idea, that you have to start with the one humanity first, and that there can be never any interest formulated which is against the interest of humanity. With other words, humanity comes first, and after that comes the national interest, but it must not be a contradiction. And I think if you look at the long arc of human development, now we have nations, and they are important because they separate people because of the culture, the tradition, the language. But if you look at where we will be in 100 years from now, when we are a spacefaring nation, I think the importance of national borders will become less important, and we will grow more and more into the one humanity. And I think this is a beautiful vision. And I would really think it's a good idea to create a political party where people of all different nations who join this idea of a joint vision of humanity would become members. And that way you would propagate the idea that we are one humanity. And I think this is a fantastic idea. We should talk about a lot more.
Well, at least this is attainable, with the help of technology. We can bring people like you guys together to discuss on the topic, from different parts of the world, with the help of internet, with this advanced technology. It's easier to do, let's say, because political parties play such an important role in the national life, in the global politics. So Adam, I want to start with you here. Usually if you have a multi-party system, and different parties, probably they have different priorities. And in an ideal situation, they would be having a cooperative relationship instead of, a different one. But in the reality, often we have, opposition parties. They are confrontational, they are adversarial, to the point of probably getting no work done, in a worse scenario. So how do you suggest, is there any way to narrow the differences, to bring them together, to have the dialogue instead of focusing on the differences?
Yeah, I do not think that there is a need for dialogue between all parties. I'm sorry to say that, but I will explain that, because I'm living in country, like now I'm in China, but when I was in Lebanon, like there is many parties, and each party represents a class in the society, and they have very different goals, so for what we will speak together. So my idea is that, like, a political party can only be a representative of one class of the society. So the interest of these classes will be contradictory. So there is no place for dialogue between those parties. And I will give you an example. For example, a communist party, if a communist party in one country meets with fascist party, so about what they will speak together, which dialogue they will make together, is there as in very different sides, So, but I think if, for example, we are speaking about the left-wing party, those parties, of course, can meet together and to achieve their common goal. But in some countries where there is a lot of parties, like Lebanon, for example, it's very difficult to make a dialogue between them. Actually, there are many different parties because there are many different ideology, and there are many different paths for those parties. So I think it's not easy at all, and we don't need it. At the end, there is one party will win the leadership, and took people to what he think is the good for those people. For example, I'm communist, so I think socialism is the best for my people. So I will fight to get this goal.
Well, I think, what I'm referring to, in an extreme situation, probably, usually like you have a two-party system or three-party system after the election, and then you sometimes sink into a paralysis situation. You would find it difficult to form a government even. It takes probably, 6 months, even 1 year to form a government. Or that government could last only 3 months, in an extreme situation. But anyway, there are, obviously you are right. Parties represent different interests, but still there's a issue of like working together. I think something in common. For example, improving the living standard of the people. I think if any party, if they acknowledge publicly, probably that should be part of their goal too, right? Whatever party you have.
Yeah, but this I think what I was speaking about is the political game in United States, for example. There is two parties, and they make the election. After one party wins the election, after that they start to make some discussion together to work together. But for me, those two parties are the same. So it's like some left or right-wing parties meet together. So in the United States, for me, it's just a game, so to don't give people choice. You have to choose from black and more black, or from white and more white. So, there is no choices. So, but in reality, I mean, when we are speaking about really different parties, like different ideas, different ideologies, it's not easy to let them sit together and speak together, because there are different ideas and there are different goals, so why they will speak together about what? But for example, if two parties from different country and they have different ideas, they will meet together to solve some big problem between two nations or two peoples. So it's okay. This is, of course, it's okay.
Yeah, I guess, the situation varies from country to country. Let me jump to, the United States. You mentioned about the US situation. In Gudrun, you are from the United States. I want you to share with us, you are from the Communist Party of the United States. But before that, Adam mentioned about the US two parties, Republicans, Democrats. Some people to say they are the same, in particular on many of the issues, actually. What do you make of that?
Well, I think there's a lot of truth to what Adam said. I mean, of course, there are differences, and there are positions on certain issues that there are disagreements about, but most of those fall under the rubric of what would be termed social issues. And what really we're talking about when it comes to differences between Republicans and Democrats are differences between wings of capital, right? You've got the more nationalistic wing of capital represented by the Republicans that want to decouple, that want to bring the economy back to more efficiently exploit workers in the United States. And then you've got the more internationalist capital that's represented by the Democrats that want to continue their version of globalization, their version of neoliberal expansion, which exploits workers all over the globe instead of just the United States. So, of course, there are differences. They're not exactly the same. In some scenarios, it may be worth pursuing common goals with people within the major bourgeois parties. But for us, and of course, we advocate for whatever limited approaches there are in that strategy. But for us, we do represent a constituency that's not represented by either party, which is to say the interests of the working class, the interests of the broadest sections of the American people, which don't have their interests represented. I mean, it's speaking of things where the parties agree. I think China is one, right? There's broad bipartisan consensus that China has to be contained, and China needs to be put under attack through all these various avenues, when in reality, the people don't necessarily want escalation. At least they didn't before there was a massive media campaign to paint China in a bad light. So, these issues that have no disagreement whatsoever are some of the more dangerous issues that don't have any argument, that don't have any real debate going on. And in fact, there's broad and an unquestioned consensus.
Well, that's right. At least on the point you mentioned about the China policy, to be tough on China, that's the consensus, without much debate. In terms of your the party, Communist Party USA, I know, like during this Cold War period, there's demonization of communism and the communists. And today, with the rising rivalry with China, again, you see, people would say, "Oh, communist China" or "red China," implying this kind of hostility toward the Chinese system or the Chinese practice. I wonder, as a member of the Communist Party in the USA, how is your life? If you tell people, like, I'm a communist, do people give you, strange looks or?
Well, I can't speak to what it would be like post-pandemic because since then I've been in China. I haven't had a chance to get back to the United States during this time. But before that, I mean, things certainly may have changed. I think there's a lot more heated discussion about China without any room for nuance or debate, as we just talked about. But in my experience, it depends on who you talk to. I think that there are generations that grew up during the Cold War that have very negative connotations toward the very idea of communism or socialism. And so if you are openly declaring yourself a communist, you will get those kinds of reactions. But among younger people who don't have that kind of ideological baggage that was developed during that time because they grew up after the end of the Soviet Union, after the end of that Cold War, there's more interest and there's more sympathy and there's more openness to this being an idea worth considering. And I think and it's not just a question of kind of individual reactions, but also the broader material forces that have caused a change in people's thinking over the last 20 or so years, with the financial crisis, with the wars on terror that were eventually very unpopular among the people in the country, with the economic crises that came from the pandemic, with the election of Donald Trump, with the rise of Bernie Sanders as a social democratic, still within the Democratic Party, but who declared himself a socialist. You have a greater interest in these ideas, and you have a greater, like I said, openness to the notion that these might not be so ridiculous or wrong, and in fact, they may be beneficial for them, and they may be an alternative worth considering. Which is why I think, again, one of the reasons why there is such a huge ramp up in attacks on China is because China does present an alternative, not necessarily something a country has to follow exactly to the letter, but there are certainly very good examples that China can present as an alternative that could be studied and followed, and that's a threat.
Right. I think there is a survey reflecting the desire of the young people, young Americans. Actually, like a majority of them, they do favor socialism over capitalism. But that's a topic for another day. Let's shift to China a little bit. Xialu, you are doing research on the Communist Party of China. China recently celebrated, the CPC actually celebrated its 100th anniversary. So it's very successful 100 years. Tell us, what lessons or what experience do we have from the past 100 years of the Communist Party of China?
Okay, thank you very much for the question. And first of all, I would like to make a very kind of interesting point is that the Communist Party of China, although it is now 100 years old, it is not old. It is a kind of young party because it is kind of energetic, because it is facing the future. So recently, the 6th plenary of the 19th Central Committee just passed a resolution that's about the historical achievements and historical experience for the past 100 years. So we have noticed that they have been coined as the 10 sticking to, the 10 gentry, the 10 sticking to. So if you ask me to generalize some of the good points among or from the 10 sticking to, I would like to say that the first interesting point is that the Communist Party of China always try to challenge itself for the theoretical innovation. And the second point is that the Communist Party of China always to focus on the mission, and it has always a very clear long-term goal, just like us, ordinary people. So if we just go to work every day, go to eat every day, go to sleep every day, this kind of routine will just alienate us from the original mission and our original kind of our goal. So make us forget about what we are going to do in the first place. However, the Communist Party of China, it has always kind of it has always kept this mission, the original mission, the inspiration, the initial mission to itself, to the 95 million members, 95 plus million members, to remember the original kind of goal and the mission. So the long-term goal is to rejuvenate the Chinese nation, to make China kind of prosper, like this kind of thing. So that's the second point. The third point is that the Communist Party of China always put the people at the center of its policies, not only in the economic policy, but also the social welfare policy, but also the political and the cultural policy and other kind of the international policy. Not only Chinese people, but also all the peoples around the world, like the shared future of the mankind, this kind of ideas and the theory. So I would like to say that in general, first of all, the innovation, not only in theory, but also in practice, and then long-term goal, the original mission, and then people-centered orientation. These are the 3 points we can just highlight as the success, or the deep code, or we can say the secret of the success of the Communist Party of China.
Valuable lessons and experience from the Communist Party of China. And also, if you look at the Chinese practice of politics, for example, inside this Chinese system, you have election and also selection and promotion based on meritocracy, you can call it, and also political consultation for the CPPCC, right? CPPCC, so yes. You basically, you have this democratic parties working together with the Communist Party of China, and for the sake of the national service, right? Tell us more about this kind of cooperation, CPC and other political parties, and even non-party members,
Yes, that's very interesting point, because this just touches one of the 10 sticking to of the experience. That's the the ninth one, sticking to the United Front. Okay, so United Front actually originally it worked as a strategy. It worked as a kind of a temporary strategy to make more friends and to isolate some kind of the people who are not necessarily friends, but not necessarily foes of the Communist Party of China during the revolutionary period. But later on, this strategy, temporary strategy, United Front, it developed into an institution. It developed into a political system that with Chinese characteristics to try to cooperate, try to, let's say, cooperate as many good elements as possible into a kind of circle, like the Communist Party of China, like the sun in a solar system, and other kind of good elements, good elites, they just like the planets, okay? All these kind of planets circle around this kind of circle, but they focus on the same mission. They focus on the similar mission, that is to make China prosper, that is to make Chinese people live in a better situation. And so they share a similar goal, and they try to make the endeavor with the same direction. So not only the political consultative conference, but also those kind of the 8 democratic parties, and also other kind of the religious and other kind of the minor ethnic group. They all cooperated. They are cooperated into this kind of the great endeavor. So if you ask me what is the main characteristic, or what is the kind of the innovation or contribution to the kind of the world political party communities, I would like to argue that the United Front, not only as a strategy, but also as an institution, can just stand for the Chinese characteristics.
Well, that's probably why you hear when you talk about the Chinese politics, a lot of cooperation. They stress very much about the cooperation within the party, with other parties, with parties from other countries too. Now move on to this, the inside the CPC, inside the party. So I want to ask you this question. You are the this young talent at one of the branches of the CPC, like in the university. So what about the training and cultivating of young talents, young officials, in terms of a party building of the CPC?
Well, thank you so much for the question. I think that for us youth, we tend to try new forms of different expressions to interpret own understandings to the spirit of the party. For example, we young people are willing to try some new media platforms such as Bilibili, TikTok, Kuaishou, and something like this. And I would also like to give another example about my own experience, because I am now in the student art troop at Tsinghua University. So in our party branch, we go through the form of artistic creation to realize our youth interpretation of the spirit of the party. For example, our team members play a dance program called I Love You China every year. I Love You China is a dance program that combines the traditional history, revolutionary history, and also cultural history of China from the perspective of youth. So after this performance, we also promoted the program through various media platforms. So in this way, we interpret the spirit of the party by performing this program.
Well, you mentioned about these social, we call it social media platforms like Kuaishou, like Douyin, etc. Bilibili, for example. Was speaking to an executive of Taobao. She mentioned about how important to have this fresh blood, the young graduates from universities. How important it is to listen to them about basically planning new products, new services. Because young people know what sells, what's trendy, what's popular, and how you will, access probably or win the hearts of the young people or next generation. As a party, as a part of the politics, I would say probably that's related too. So how important it is for the party, for the CPC, to listen to the young people and to incorporate the young people into the party building, into the party work.
Well, I think it is very important that the party should listen to its future community, which represents for the youth. Because actually, from the perspective of party member myself, I think we should be more proactive in shouldering our responsibilities as well, and like using the unique creativity and open-mindedness of our young people, and to actively understand different cultures to promote the mutual trust based on understanding, to resolve conflicts and to promote the connection of people's hearts in different regions. And I think from the party itself, it certainly needs to encourage young people to promote their voices, to share their ideas, to share their insights.
Right. I think, as Xiaolu mentioned, the party was 100 years, but it's not old. If you want to keep being young, you have to bring the young people and listen to the young people. But from China to the global community, I want to talk a little bit about this, the global risks, the challenges we face. So Olivier, if you look at the world right now, what's the biggest challenge for you? You think for human being probably, and how we are going to tackle this problem?
Well, thank you for the question. Globally, if we look at many issues that are actually threatening the global peace, there are actually many. If we consider the world as Professor Helge mentioned, the world as a global village, like humanity with a shared future. Like I would just, you name it, but democratic processes are actually one of the big challenges that are facing the global peace, alongside terrorism, economic crisis, and then you have also energy security, but also disinformation. I think for me, the two biggest, among the long list, I would say democratic processes and the disinformation. Of course, we know that the economic crisis and the energy insecurity are also very big challenges, but also I could not agree more with the issue brought by several world's leaders during the UN General Assembly, brushing on the threats of the climate change and unilateralism and their impact to the international peace. Because if we look at it, as a couple of speakers already mentioned, every country has its own realities, and it is actually very difficult to encompass this idea of unilateralism. That's actually linked with what I said earlier, democratic processes, and especially as we're looking at sustainability and the future. So for me, those are the big challenges. I would say democratic processes, disinformation, of course, climate changes and unilateralism.
Democratic process. Are you meaning that the problems with liberal democracy, and the disinformation? Are you meaning basically like what Trump has mentioned often? Fake news. Of course, people disagree with him. It depends. What kind of news,
Part
or what
of
kind
it.
of information, or where it is from.
Part of it should be two layered, because this information could even be within the country. Because we're talking about the youth. And there is actually a knowledge gap that actually should be filled in terms of, we're talking about now the young people involvement into politics, the young people understanding actually how it works, So disinformation, even within the country, for me, I prefer looking within the country. Yes, within a particular country, within a particular system. That's what I mentioned by disinformations and democratic process.
Yeah. Gopal, what are the biggest challenges for you globally?
Well, thank you so much. First of all, I would like to affix my answer to the theoretical perspective of the media imagery and social learning. As you know, like the previous speakers have already alluded to the issue of digital era that we live in, where information could be easily stored and quickly shared on the internet, and to a larger extent using social media. So the problem of divisions and disinformation would always crop up. And this is the opportune moment for us and political parties to empower the youth. And this is the empowerment that I'm talking about. I'm referring to the empowerment of the mind through political education and proper marketing strategies. I'm mentioning political education here in the sense that many a times, for example, in our case, the youth mostly use social media to stir rivalism, to settle political scores. And of course, these are fueled by ideological differences and divisions that I mentioned earlier on. They are using this instead of promoting social harmony within a given setup. So this calls for an urgent need to educate these young minds that politics actually should promote leadership ability, peace and order, instead of causing divisions. And I would hypothesize that these actions might be the ones that are contributing to the low turnout of the youth to engage in partisan politics. And this is when now political marketing comes in. So there is need for a paradigm shift to build a party. First, you have to think about its public image, which relies heavily on the members' actions in the public sphere or even in the media. And these are the actions that should be well packaged in a manner that looks so interesting and respectful and inspiring to the youth. As the previous speakers have already mentioned, that the youth actually know the future. They know everything that could be inspiring to them. So I think these are the solutions that we should be now looking towards.
Well, back to Olivia, you mentioned about the challenges. I would like to hear, what solutions do you suggest? What we can do to fix those challenges, problems.
Yeah, definitely empowerment. As I couldn't agree much with my brother. Empowerment, because there's a lot of if we consider actually how to deal with those. When we talk about the youth, we talk about sustainability. So empowerment in terms of, I would say, education, and not only in terms of media. I agree with you that something, the youth are feeling more integrated when they co-create, when they actually partner, when they feel that they are on board. So if we deal with this kind of global realities or global challenges, knowing that, as you mentioned, the percentage of the youth, in terms of the world population. So if we empower them so as actually not only in terms of media, but education, to reduce the knowledge gap, to reduce or to tackle this information, then they will have more trust, because it's also all about trust. Yeah, it's all about trust as well. Yeah, thank you.
Interesting point. Gopal, you mentioned about the media image. It reminds me of, for example, December this month. Actually, represents this 20th anniversary of China's entry into the WTO. We know like how China has changed over the past 20 years. And also, in China, when people celebrate this anniversary, people often focus on the message of, that's a great chance for China to develop, to unleash its potential. At the same time, they talk about how China contributes, China's rise, China's market contributes to the growth of the economy in other countries through trading, through investment. But if you look at some of other media, for example, I wouldn't name the name, I would probably, because, BBC in the West usually considered as one of the, important media outlets. There is a piece carried by them, they say, in how we, the Western countries, let China eat our lunch. When you read this title, you see like, so it's China who has successfully taken advantage of the West and developed itself at the expense of us. Of course, it's not the case. We know it's not the case. The big companies doing investment in China because they can profit from doing that, right? Outsourcing of jobs. All the complaint in some of the rich countries, say working class people, they are not well taken care of. But mostly it's really about the domestic policy, right? There's a lack of a balance. You prefer, the rich and the powerful, and then the middle class somehow being ignored. Then there are rising complaints about globalization, as we see the backlash, sort of. So, this is important about communication. You are the expert on communication. How we can fix that kind of a problem that creates bias, that creates distrust, that creates problems among nations and peoples.
Thank you very much for bringing that up. Actually, we always have, in the media, we always have these two opposing forces. They are opposing in the fact that actually, when you view the West view China as a threat. That's a fact. And when China is a threat, obviously, the media from the West would always have an agenda that they would want to paint, China with that brush to say, no, actually, China is doing this, which is not supposed to be done in that way. For example, just a quick example. Nobody can tell me that China's model has never worked. For many years, it has worked and it has proven to be working still even now. So I think what needs to be done is political tolerance, because everything is politics, a game of politics, geopolitics, and all those. So we need to start tolerating each other. And this is the issue I mentioned earlier on of political education. Until we maybe take a decision of including politics or political education in the school curriculum from the lower levels, so that when children grow up, they grow up with the mentality of understanding how politics are, and trying to teach them the mutual understanding and cooperation, multilateralism. These are the issues that we should be talking about instead of causing divisions using the media. The media is supposed to unite us. We're supposed to be united through the media. But what we see nowadays is that every country, every political system has got its own media, which has got its own agenda in terms of trying to protect its own territory and painting others as the bad apples. So this is not supposed to be happening. We need more education in that regard, more so that now we tolerate each other.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for explanation on that. That's important. Basically, it's like a West and China, in particular, U.S. and China. Unfortunately, the two they have a lot of trade, but at the same time, we are seeing the rising tensions. But anyway, in the U.S., we had this democracy summit. In China, we have the International Forum on Democracy. Let's talk about a little bit about democracy. Here, Helga, in what way can the young people help or play a role in prioritizing the people's will, the people's power in the party building or in the party's decision making or policy making?
I think the best way is to address the most urgent problems of mankind right now. I mean, you have the danger of nuclear war. I think, the previous speaker did not address that, but I think this is something which, if I would be a young person, I would be really having sleepless nights about, because you had Senator Roger Wicker, who is, after all, the second most important man in the Senate Armed Service Committee in the United States, who, in the context of the Ukraine crisis, said that they want to keep the right for first use of nuclear weapons. And that has not been refuted. So the question of, a peace movement in a real sense by, educating the world population about the danger of nuclear war and why that cannot be an option because nobody would survive it. So I think that that would be a very important task for young people, because the future belongs to them, if there is one. A second issue, I would think, is the question that we are still in the pandemic, which is out of control because of, new variants developing, and you have health crises in many countries, like Haiti, Yemen, Syria, many African countries who have not the vaccination, who do not have a modern health system. And I think that, China has proposed a health Silk Road, which I think is a way of spreading the idea that every single nation of the planet needs a modern health system. And, I have called for a committee of coincidence of opposites, which is the idea, that you need a common approach whereby young and old people, medical people, farmers, people from all walks of life unite in order to build a modern health system in every single country. In that case, the pandemic can be a turning point in history, because if you recognize that without doing that, the pandemic may never go away, and you may have new mutations which become so dangerous that they even make the vaccines ineffective, and we could really plunge into a dark age. So we are at a branching point, where people either recognize that you need a modern health system in Afghanistan, in Haiti, in all the countries which are in dire humanitarian crisis, and that the young people could take it as their mission to say, this is what we want to do. We become health workers, we take training, we educate the population of what measures must be taken in a pandemic. And if that would become a common effort, this could become the beginning of a new world economic order, because once you build a modern hospital, you realize you need electricity, you need water, you need infrastructure. So the agreement on building modern health systems in every country could be the beginning of the recognition that the underdevelopment of the developing sector must be overcome for good. So I would think that that would be a common mission, especially for young people, taking it and revolutionizing the whole way of thinking. In other words, that the idea that the developing sector would be undeveloped forever is something which we have to get rid of that idea, and we have to replace it with the idea of the development right of every single nation to become a modern nation based on their traditions and cultures, but still to have access to infrastructure, electricity, water, just the basic needs of life. And I think that that is the branching point we are at. And I would really hope that a lot of young people from all over the world would say, yes, we become a fighting force for such a world health system.
Mm-hmm. Well, Helga, you mentioned several interesting points. I want to go to Adam. Helga mentioned about development, infrastructure investment. For China, it's very important. It prioritizes development. I think a lot of developing countries do. And then, China mentioned about the common values. One of the values, I think 6 of them, is development. China prioritize development to that level. It sees that as a value. You have to follow. You have to, keep it at the core. What do you make of that? You're also from a developing country, for example, Lebanon.
Yeah, I agree with all what they said, my friends now. But there is a problem today in the world, which maybe not all people can see as we can see from Middle East countries. So, for example, if we speak about education or development or infrastructure or all those things which are very good to develop your country and achieve a good life for people. But the problem is that in this world where we live now, there is a big factor which we can see easily, which is war, for example. There is some people who come for your country and destroy your country. So what you will do by education? There is no people to teach them. You know, for example, in Syria, more than 9 million people are refugees around the world, in Europe, in Lebanon, in everywhere. It's the same in Iraq, same in Afghanistan, in Yemen. So the first things what we should find a solution for it is the war, you know. So we have to stop this what my opinion, what this is my big problem, you know. It's we have to stop United States to make war against anyone don't follow United States, you know. So this is the main problem. After that, maybe we can look to make a good relationship between, for example, some countries, between China and Lebanon, China and Arab countries, which we need this one, you know, like in Lebanon, really we need to do that kind of relationship with China because we need investment in Lebanon. But the only problem is that we can't, you know. There is someone who tell us who are our friends and who are our enemies, you know. So we don't have the right to choose who is our friend. So and if we say no, China, for example, it's our friend, they will start to make for us problems, and the problem it's kind of destroyed everything. So just I want to add this point because I listened to the other friends. They mentioned some problems for youth people, but in this world we still have war, which is the biggest problem. And I agree, I totally agree with our friend from Germany that the nuclear war also it's very dangerous game. The United States politicians, they are playing this game again, you know, like with Australia and UK and other countries, which is very dangerous game. We can't play this game again in the 21st century. It's enough for that.
Also Helga mentioned about, of course, you know, probably for young people, they would become, you know, sleepless when some politicians, you know, recklessly talked about nuclear attack, things like that. Ian, you know, we are talking about a politician from the US. Actually, they talked about nuclear attack in terms of Russia, Ukraine, the European tension over there. Are you worried about that kind of nightmare?
Well, it's not something I try to think about because it is kind of an unthinkable thing, you know, but it is a very real possibility in these most recent days. And I mean, these recent years, I should say. And yes, it is very troubling that there is a refusal to commit to a principle of non-first use of nuclear weapons. China has abided by this principle for many, many decades now, only holding a limited amount of nuclear weapons as a defensive tool. Let's not forget the only country that's ever dropped a nuclear bomb on a target is the United States on Japan. So it's a very real concern, but the interesting thing about the portrayal of this fear in the media is the reversal of that fear and the sort of turning the threat on its head and making the country that has a no first use policy the threat, China, and making the country that has shown a willingness to use nuclear weapons on civilian populations, the United States, as the aggrieved party, when in fact the reality shows us it's the opposite. So yes, of course, it's a serious problem. I think when a political candidate some years ago, Jeremy Corbyn, was challenged on his commitment to no first use, famously in a televised forum, the crowd was sort of baying for his surrender and his admittance to willingness to drop a nuclear bomb on a target. And it took someone else in the audience to say the obvious thing to, I think, a lot of thinking rational people was, this is lunacy. We can't seriously be considering using these weapons. You know, this is an unfortunate reality of a world in which nuclear proliferation has taken place. But these rising of tensions make the use of nuclear weapons more and more acceptable in the public discourse. And that is a very frightening and very real phenomenon that we should all be very concerned about. However, in our day-to-day lives, it's not really something that needs to be incorporated, because then how would you get through the day? I certainly wouldn't. I can't speak to everyone else, but.
Well, that's very unfortunate, to know the development. It's a danger. It's a real danger. Well, let's focus on democracy, and I mean, if that reflects the will of the people inside a party, I would say. Olivier, you have been staying in China for a long time, and you said the best places to understand China and Chinese culture of village and counties. What do you mean by that? Do you think there's a reflection in Chinese politics of people, grassroots level people, their will and their concern?
Yeah, definitely. Throughout my stay in China, I came to realize that in those villages or in those counties, you can actually see the China original aspirations, and you can even better understand the people-centered philosophy, which is emphasizing on the importance of people, putting people at the center of their polities. So I actually volunteered in more than 10 counties and villages. I even served as a village official, where I was shadowing the local cadres. And I realized that the more you spend time in villages and counties, and then when you return to the cities, you can actually see how those original aspirations are actually passed on through to the later generation, or how the later generation inherited, from the older generation. So after volunteering in many counties, actually there are two things that I saw that is actually linked to the party. I saw the trust and I saw the proximity. The trust and proximity; those are the two key words. I'm back after my experience, and for that I refer from the people and the party. While shadowing the local cadre, I saw that they actually they've mastered the local people's concern, and that's how the local people are trusting them so much. And when I say them, which is actually the other interesting fact that I want to mention here, like the young people. The cadres that I was shadowing was actually, they were young people, actually young graduates that actually went to volunteer to counties upon their graduations. So they went there to actually have a down-to-earth experience and knowledge about, to be helpful for the future. And for that, I see that, okay, they're serving also while learning, and at the same time while preparing for the future. And I think these are very valuable points that, many countries and young people from all over countries can actually learn from.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a very interesting point. I will get back to you. But before that, I want to move to, Zhongyu over there, young people, probably your friends or your, classmates, schoolmates, probably some of them will graduate and, choose to work in this grassroots level, at the village level, at the village head to work. The situation could be entirely different from, the situation in Beijing, in Shanghai, the big cities. But this is a Chinese practice. And then if they are doing well, they'll be promoted to the higher level in the government, and then higher level or even higher level until probably one day in the capital, in the central government. Until that time, they have accumulated rich experience and becoming, I would say, very capable in problem solving. But it's it's a challenge. There's a lot of hardship living in the country. So what do your classmates say about that kind of practice?
Okay, thank you so much for this question again. So actually, I think as for I think the biggest barriers exist in the platforms between young people and also the party and older party members is the platforms and the ways to communicate. Because that we youth tend to try some more new forms of expressions, and we young people are willing to try new medias. And when we communicate with older party members, we may encounter the problem that we may be afraid to communicate because we are less experienced and do not know that enough. and this may cause some misunderstandings. But I think that we can still learn how to communicate with an open mind and communicate effectively. I also consider that this to be both a challenge and also an opportunity. I think the challenge is that youth tend to be more innovative, while older party members are more conservative, and it is because we share ideas and we trust each other, whether we are young or older generations.
Right. That's important. Obviously, that kind of communication. What Olivier mentioned. So Xiaolu is really about the grassroots democracy. How you bring the will of the people and the power of the people to the central government and into their decision-making, policy-making process. I know every year when there's National People's Congress, the big meeting, every year in early March, you have delegates, deputies from around the country, thousands of them, many of them are from villages, factories, middle schools, different walks of life. Is that the way, part of the way, I would say, China conducts its democracy?
Yes, of course. First of all, just like you mentioned that in each and every year, the early March, the National People's Congress would be convened. And actually, the National People's Congress in China, there are something roughly around 3,000 deputies. That's the kind of, we can say, it is the biggest national congress in this world. Like China has 3,000 deputies at national level. But apart from this, in addition to this, China still has 2.6 million something, 2.6 million some deputies at provincial and the city and the county and township level as deputies. So this kind of a local people congress, the deputies of the local people congress, they are the real kind of the they represent the real mechanism or the dynamism of the whole process, people's democracy, because they concern not only about how to implement a national policy into their local area, but also how to connect to the local people, connect to the grassroots people, voice the grassroots kind of their opinion to the city level, to the provincial level, to make their local policies more adaptable, more kind of used to the local situation. So this is the kind of a whole complex mechanism of the whole people's democracy, whole process people's democracy. And not only in the National People's Congress and the local People's Congress, but also in the political consultative conferences in national level and local level. These are also the mechanism and dynamism to help the people voice their kind of opinion and help the people deputy and representative to make their wishes into reality.
Well, back to Olivier, you have been to these villages, to the townships, you meet people living there. And, of course, one part of the Chinese successful story is really about the change of this landscape in the country area. Previously, it was the poorest regions, but nowadays, absolute poverty is being eradicated. And now China is targeting at the common prosperity. Tell us, you are from Cameroon, and when you look at that, do you think there's anything, experience or lessons China may share with other countries like your country, or is there anything China can learn from the practice of your country?
Well, there is still a big room, for learning. I think there's always something that we have to learn. Of course, going to so many counties, you see from, if I'm taking poverty alleviation, you see from poverty alleviation, rural revitalization, and then you come to big cities. So you witness the whole process. And this is actually very insightful for countries like Cameroon or in many countries in Africa or developing countries that are actually, because poverty alleviation, this is like a global also issue, when attached to actually when we talk about development. So I think there are many practices not to copy and paste, but that could inspire or trigger some changes, in Cameroon, for example, in African countries, because they've been through especially when you go to counties, you even see. I will give you some very concrete examples. I've been to this Shanxi in the Xin County, where I actually witnessed poverty alleviation through paper cutting. So meaning there are many ways. There's not a single way to poverty alleviation. So these kind of ways, these kind of examples that you see, or when you see them empowering local or villages' ideas, making their ideas become a product, or lifting up the local initiatives, it is very inspiring. And from coming from Cameroon, I think this is something we can absorb, or this is something we can learn from. Of course, now the way backwards, because it's also Cameroon. When you talk about Cameroon, like the autochthony remains actually one of the central way in understanding Cameroonian politics. So this is also something that we can also relate to China, right? But then there's this stronger trust. There's this stronger trust here, and this stronger proximity here that I think is more valuable for Cameroon and many African countries.
Well, young people are the future of the world. How they see the world and how they respond to the problems of today will not only play a role in politics like party building, but also shape what kind of future we are going to live in. Many thanks to our guests, Helga, Xiaolu, Olivier, Ian, Zhongshu, Goplang, and Adam. Thank you for your time, insights, and wonderful discussion. I'm Xu Qinduo in Beijing. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
And I hope you enjoyed the discussion.
Very much. Enjoyed very much. Thank you very much.
Okay, take care.
Take care.